All right, let's dive into the pretty wild world of ceremonial magic. It's this ancient art that, believe it or not, claims you can gain power over a world you can't even see. At the heart of it all is one huge question. Can we actually control the spirits of an invisible world? It's a concept that has fascinated people for centuries, but it's also terrified them. It promises unbelievable power. But you just know there's a catch, right? So what is this stuff really? Well, ceremonial magic is defined as a super-structured practice. We're not talking about random luck or just hoping for the best. This is treated as a scientific application of certain formula. The idea is you can use these formulas to command beings from what they call the astral world. It's like having a very specific, very complicated password for a very powerful system.
Okay, but that brings up a really important point. Is this whole thing a noble search for knowledge, or is it just an incredibly dangerous game? The texts we're digging into draw a very, very sharp line in the sand.
The source material is super clear about this. Ceremonial magic, the OG art form, isn't automatically evil. The real danger, it says, comes from when it gets twisted into sorcery, what most of us just call black magic. They're really two sides of the exact same coin.
And apparently, this isn't a new problem. The text traces this corruption way, way back to places like Atlantis and Egypt. The story goes that these groups of so-called black magicians took control of things by deliberately messing with sacred rituals. Their whole goal was to confuse people, grab power for themselves, and create this legacy of superstition that you could argue is still with us today.
So this corruption leads right into the theory behind black magic. What do you even have to believe to get to a point where you're making a pact with an unseen world?
It basically boils down to these four things. First, you have to believe there's an invisible universe out there, full of both good and evil spirits. Second, that there's some secret process, a hidden key, that lets you talk to them. Third, that you can actually strike a deal, a contract, that gives you temporary control over one of these spirits. And fourth, and this is the big one, that pact has a price. After you die, the tables turn, and the master becomes the servant.
And this quote really gets to the heart of it. The real danger isn't just spooky stuff in the dark. It's the scientific perversion of occult power. It's twisting something profound and powerful just for selfish reasons, for money, for fame, for personal satisfaction. A motivation that, let's be honest, hasn't really changed over the centuries.
Now, to make all this theory a little more real, the texts bring up a very famous or maybe infamous figure, a guy named Dr. Johannes Faustus. And the legend is he actually left behind a personal account of his dealings. So in what are claimed to be his own words from 1524, Faust says he was totally shocked when his very first try actually worked. A powerful spirit just showed up and laid out the deal right then and there. I'll serve you, but we need to make a pact. Faust claims he felt totally trapped since he'd summoned the thing without the proper protection. So what kind of services was Faust getting? Turns out he had a whole roster of spirits he could call on. And what's kind of funny is how practical he was about it. He apparently dismissed a couple of them, Anigal and Marbule, for being too slow, only swift as a bird. In the end, he went with a spirit named Axial, who was as swift as human thought and could bring him wretches from literally anywhere on Earth. As you can see, each spirit had its own specialty, from finding treasure to controlling what's lost in the sea.
Now, you don't just get this kind of control by asking nicely. It required very specific tools and rituals. So, how do you actually do any of this? This is where things get really, really meticulous and pretty bizarre.
According to these texts, the absolute key, the secret sauce, is being able to control something called the Great Magical Agent, or astral light. Think of it as this universal life force that's in everything. Taming that raw, chaotic energy is the whole point. And this force is often symbolized by that very famous, very misunderstood creature, the Goat of Mendes, also known as Baphomet.
And to handle this kind of power, you need protection, big time. Dr. Faust supposedly laid out this incredibly elaborate way to create a magic circle. Look at this. It involves 3 circles made of specific things like virgin parchment and red silk, all pinned down with consecrated crosses, and the magician has to stand right in the middle on a pentagram.
And that brings us to a really crucial idea. Black magic isn't some original creation, it's a distortion. It doesn't have its own symbols. What it does is hijack the symbols of white magic and flips them, inverts them, reverses them, basically to show that it's the polar opposite, the left-handed path. The pentagram is the perfect example of this.
When it's upright, 1 point up, it represents the human soul rising above our basic animal instincts. But you flip it over 2 points up, and suddenly it looks like a goat's head, the goat of Mendez, sometimes called the footprint of the devil. It completely changes the meaning to signify a fall from grace. It's the same shape, just inverted to mean the exact opposite.
Which, of course, brings us to the end of this road. What's the final bill? What is the price the sorcerer ultimately has to pay for all this temporary power?
Well, the texts are pretty blunt about it. From the second that pact is made, it's a battle of wits between the magician and the spirit. And here's the kicker. It's a battle the demon is always, eventually, going to win. That feeling of being in control, it's just an illusion from the start.
You know how the stories always say the contract has to be signed in blood? Well, that's not just for dramatic effect. It's based on this core occult idea that if you control someone's blood, you control their soul. The very act of signing is the act of surrender.
And the final outcome is, well, it's grim. The sorcerer lives in constant fear. They're terrified of dying because they know death means becoming a slave to their own demon. This fear pushes them to do anything to extend their life, sometimes even becoming what's called an occult vampire, literally draining the life from other people just to buy a little more time. And that leaves us with one final, kind of unsettling thought from the source material. The idea that black magic never really went away, it just changed its name. The text points to things in our world, like prosperity psychology or super aggressive, high-pressure salesmanship, as modern versions of twisting universal forces for purely selfish gain. So it poses the question, have the core principles of sorcery just put on a business suit and adapted to the modern world? It's a fascinating and maybe a little disturbing thought to end on.